Families of fallen heroes, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't help but notice that all of these younger speakers who got up here before me all set out a couple pages of notes. I realized even if I had the notes, I can't see anymore, so it don't do me any good. Mr. Pino, I don't know what position Mike Mastroni holds at Sikorsky Aircraft, but if I were you, I'd consider a real nice promotion for this young man. He's super. Last year, several of us were invited to be guests of the Marine Corps contingent at Pensacola Naval Air Station. And we were told that when we got there, a couple of us would be expected to speak at their monthly social. When we were picked up at the airport by a Marine Corps major, we were told that they had taken the liberty of researching our military records in the Marine Corps archives and on the internet, and they're delighted to have us aboard. Anyway, that night at the social, when I got up to speak, I was facing 375 Marine Corps officers who had all served at least 1 or 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And I said to them, usually when I speak to a group about my exploits of World War II, I tend to embellish and exaggerate somewhat. I said, but when Major Stanley told me that he actually researched my military record in the Marine Corps archives, I find that I have to stand before you and for the first time in my life actually tell you the truth about what I did. Seriously, a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, the United States of America was very close to losing the war in the Pacific. And at that time, our military leaders cried out desperately to the aviation industry throughout America that they had to come up with a fighter plane that was fast enough and maneuverable enough to allow us to be competitive with the Japanese Zero. And it was at that time that the good folks at Chance Fort Sikorsky Aircraft in Stratford, Connecticut stepped up to the plate. And they developed a fighter plane that was by far the best plane in World War II, the F-4U Corsair. The success of the Corsair was highly dependent upon many, many people and the teamwork and cooperation of a lot of people. First and foremost were some brilliant aeronautical engineers at Chance Fort who came up with the idea of a fighter plane with inverted gull wings that could accommodate an overpowered engine, which in turn would use an extremely large propeller. The second part of the Corsair team were the thousands of Chance Fort employees that worked day and night on the assembly lines and managed to produce some 12,000 Corsairs over the following 3 years. And the third part of the team were those men who had to actually transport those 12,000 Corsairs from Stratford, Connecticut, all the way out to the Central and Southwest Pacific theaters of war, where they were so desperately needed. And that's where we got into the picture. The fourth component of the great Corsair team, the pilots who had the honor and privilege of taking these Corsairs into combat. What was it like for a 19 or 20-year-old young man to climb into the cockpit of a Corsair all by himself and shove that throttle forward for the first time and feel a mighty surge of power from a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine. It was awesome. It was a thrill that I cannot possibly describe, but I want to guarantee you one thing. Every single one of us, even though we may have been a little bit frightened, we were also cocky and confident that we thought we were invincible up there. As a matter of fact, every single one of us thought we were Clark Kent flying around up there in a Corsair. The Corsair was just like a seasoned prize fighter who could take a punch right on the chin time and time again and not go down. Because on many of our fighter sweeps and low-level bombing missions, our planes would get hit repeatedly by Japanese anti-aircraft, and somehow those beautiful, faithful Corsairs would get us back to our bases safely. And nobody knows that better than our own Nick Monero here, who incidentally was born and raised in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Nick actually had a 20-millimeter Japanese shell explode in the cockpit of his plane. The explosion caused near fatal injuries to Nick. It blew a gaping hole in the side of his Corsair, and it tore off 3/4 of his upright tail assembly. And somehow, Nick, though barely conscious, was able to fly that Corsair some 250 miles over treacherous Pacific waters back to his base, where he landed and immediately passed out from loss of blood. And when our Corsairs returned to our bases, the fifth and final part of the Corsair team took over, our unbelievable ground crews and mechanics, who would take those severely damaged Corsairs and perform miracles with them. They would patch those planes together and replace parts and work on those planes many times all night long under spotlights so they could have them ready for us to fly again at the break of dawn the next morning. And when the Japanese finally capitulated and surrendered and peace was declared, millions of American people literally poured out of their homes into the streets of America for an unprecedented demonstration of jubilation and celebration and joy and just appreciation. And for those of us who had the privilege of contributing in a small way to this great victory, I can assure you it is memory that each and every one of us would cherish for the rest of our lives. In closing, I want to thank the Sikorsky Fallen Heroes Committee for giving us the opportunity to participate in this most appropriate occasion. And I simply want to say, God bless our fallen heroes and their families. Thank you.